this week's episode of Beyond the Reformer, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm joined by Diane Nye, who we had on the podcast, I think it's episode 3. And if you want to hear Diane's backstory, you can listen to that episode. But today she's visiting me in Bristol and I've got her here in the studio, and I thought it would just be fabulous to go on a bit of a deep dive on teaching, because you were my mentor. I've known you 16 or 17 years, I think. You're an educator for Polestar. And I thought today, Diane, it would be just really good to do a shorter episode that is around things that might help the teachers of the world. So welcome and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So you've mentored hundreds of teachers in your role at Polestar Pilates. What do you think makes a truly successful teacher?
Well, there are so many factors to that. And if there was one ingredient, I could pinpoint, it would be difficult because it's like a recipe, isn't it? And you can come at it lots of different ways. And also, I think, teachers are so diverse that we can all be so very different and still be amazing. So the last thing we ever want to feel is that when we mentor and teach students that they are all going to become clones of us, because we're never looking for that. We want to encourage them to flourish in their own way. But I think what really makes an amazing Pilates teacher for somebody who goes through the whole process is their drive and passion. How much do they want to be a teacher? How much do they love teaching? How much do they love interacting with people? How interested are they in their subject? Because if you have those kind of things going on, you will be a great teacher. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable person to be a great teacher. In fact, I've met people along the way who have immense knowledge, but find it difficult to share that knowledge, or everything's too complex, or they can't quite find the words to, allow others to understand where they're coming from. Those communication skills as well are really important.
So true, because especially in a class experience, the experience is a big part of it. And sometimes that, as a studio owner, that's something that we're trying to help people with. Yes, the technical knowledge that you've got is one part of it, but if you can't bring it to life,
no,
you're going to get a bit stuck.
No, and there's been lots of psychology around this. People actually do have to like you. And if people like you, then they're going to want to come and do sessions with you and do classes with you. But, if, for say, you're offending people in some way, then maybe not so.
It's so true. I had a meeting with my lead instructors yesterday, and we were talking about some of the newer teachers need to bring their personalities across a bit more. And I guess that's a challenge as well, isn't it? How do you bring your personality into your teaching experience? Which I think is, like you said, is a challenge in itself, but people buy into people.
They do. And with that comes some confidence. And this is where it's tricky when you start out, because how do you walk in and be super confident when you are still learning and maybe not quite sure what it is you're doing? Some people have the ability to be super confident. No one would ever know that maybe they were nervous on the inside. But others, I think that those nerves around, we talked about this a bit before, the imposter syndrome, am I good enough to do this role? And nerves around that, or self-doubting around that, can really prevent you from shining as a teacher. We really do have to believe in ourselves.
And it's so true, isn't it? Because we talk about in our training, like, this is a business of energy, and people are constantly picking up on your energy, you're picking up on theirs.
Yes.
And if you as a client are hearing a teacher sound nervous, it's not going to help you feel safe and relaxed either, is it? So it becomes a bit of a difficult circle. You're not going to get the feedback from the clients that might help build your confidence. I'm often talking to new teachers about there is an element of this that is a performance. You have to turn up and you have to deliver. And for some people, I mean, it's tricky. Do you have any advice for people who maybe are feeling nervous? Because sometimes what I see is people then feel like they need to do more learnings or more trainings. And actually, that's not their problem. Their problem is the ability to stand up there and feel confident with what they're doing.
Yes. And I often find that people can be really good in a one-to-one setting where you're conversing with them and they're very confidently communicating. But put them in that other role where they are delivering the information. And that's when, things fall down a little bit. But what I would say to anyone to work on is that idea of you learning to be present in yourself. Now, presence is huge, because what I see with a lot of trainee instructors and new instructors is that they've had all their manuals and they've been given all this information, and there's a lot of it. And they're desperately trying to memorize all of this information. Okay. And all this sort of memorizing is going to a certain part of their brain. I mean, people talk about this left brain, this very sort of cognitive brain, and they are desperately just trying to remember what it is they're supposed to be saying. And when you're in that place, you're not present at all. You're not with yourself. You're not with the group. You're not with the individual. You're somewhere else, somewhere stuck in your head, trying to pull this information from the back of your brain somewhere. What people have to learn to do is come back down to ground. Find their own grounding, centering, center yourself, breathe. Be with yourself and be present with those of you in the room. And trust that all that information that you have learned is all in there somewhere. And when required, that information will be there. But you have to trust it's going to be there, and it will. Because we can't hold everything we've ever learned at the front of our brains. We just can't. We have to trust that, it's there and it's going to serve us well if we can stay present in the room with people.
I was talking to a group recently and I was thinking about that point and thinking about how when we're often teaching some breath work at the beginning of the class and getting people to relax, that's our opportunity as a teacher to also do it. Yes. And while we're teaching it, to do the breath, to feel our feet, to do the things you're cueing, to kind of ground yourself. And also I guess, it's giving yourself some space in your cueing. So you've got some time just to let things float to the surface and, like you said, not feel like they need to be there straight away. Because sometimes I see this when people are new teachers or we're mentoring them and they'll cue something and then they'll say like, oh, no, sorry, that's meant to be an in-breath. And it's like, it doesn't matter. But as soon as you've said that, you've kind of lost the group. Yeah. If you just let it go by and you might be like, oh, actually, I probably should have said that the other way around, or, just to kind of let things go and to kind of get into the flow of it. But I love that. It's just about feeling present and trusting that it's there.
It is. And then maybe, one of the things I've done a lot over the years is just to turn things around the other way and look at things differently. So rather than looking at exercise as a series of cues that have to be learned and remembered, is this right? If you ever have to ask yourself, is this right? Then you're coming at it from the wrong angle, because if you had learnt those exercises as movement experiences, you are in your body moving and you are having this experience of that movement. Now that runs deep to our soul, shall we say, and we can own that, absolutely own it. So when you share that with others, and that's all we're doing when we teach, we're just sharing, storytelling. I know when I teach, I even have that experience again as I'm communicating it to my students or whoever's in my class. My nervous system is rippling along with theirs, hopefully, because of having that experience. And that again really allows you to be present, and there is no right or wrong then. It is just what it is.
It's interesting, you've been my teacher and my husband said, I never know anyone who can go to work feeling like all a fluster and comes home feeling so calm. Because my day teaching, I think I've learned very early on, you have to park everything. You have to have I have almost a feeling of when I walk through the doors of the studio, I don't bring anything with me, and you have to be present. And I think so for teachers, I find teaching refills my cup, because actually it's a very mindful experience, because you're just in that moment with people. And like you said, you're having that experience as much as your clients are, which is really good. When you look at people you've mentored and the successful people out there, what things have you seen that has made them successful?
Lots of different things, lots of different things. But it's certainly not the people who've done the most courses or necessarily have the most knowledge. It's actually the people who are most interested in what they're doing. And maybe the people who have actually devoted enough time to fulfill that ambition. Okay, because I think a lot of people nowadays, we live in such a busy world, don't we? Busy lives. And it's like, yeah, I'm doing this thing, but on the side, I'm going to do that. Or I might, go and do this course on the back of that. And we're juggling, never quite doing anything complete justice. So if you want to be a great, great teacher, you have to be committed to being a great teacher. And that might take time, by the way. It's not an instant thing, for sure. We have to learn on the job. All teachers have to do that, because it's a practical thing we're doing. So there's no textbook that's going to prepare you for everything that you will experience when teaching. But if you're aware and present, and if you're listening to people and actually just have that perception with other people, you will learn and adjust as you go.
You learn so much from your clients, more than you ever do from a course.
So much.
So if you then think of somebody coming into their first year of teaching, they've just got the certificate, what advice do you give people in their first year of teaching to have a really strong start to this life?
So for me, it's be super curious about everything you observe when you're teaching. Remember, teaching is not you just standing there giving cues. You don't just deliver information, it's two-way. And so this observation that you do as a teacher is where you're learning, and you're adjusting what you say around what you see or what people are telling you. So I would say be really, really curious. And never be afraid to make we could call it a mistake. It's not normally a mistake. It's just that realization that I could have done that a little bit better. That's learning, isn't it? We're never going to learn if we always do it spot on. I've had lots of experiences over the years where I've thought, I wouldn't do it like that next time. I think I will do it this way now. And that is learning. Yeah. So I would say to anyone, be really, really kind to yourself. Be very, very curious and observant, and learn from every single class that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. You work with lots of trainees during their practice hours. We all know well the lovely process of filling in our logbook and getting all those hours in. What are the common pitfalls that you see when people are practicing their teaching or their programming? Do you see things come up?
Yes. It goes back to what's your mindset around this. Because I think it probably goes back to our school days, the way we were all conditioned to learn. And it's almost like this process that we just want to get to the end of, isn't it? Let's get there and pass the exam, and then I'm done. I can leave all that behind. And with that kind of mindset, you've forgotten the most important bit, which is everything in between, the whole process of learning, not the end destination necessarily. I like to think I've not reached mine yet. I'm still going. I'm still in that process somewhere of learning and discovering. And that way I keep a very, very open mind to allowing myself the possibility of change if I need to. But what I see with my students is they want to get to that end. end place. So they have, hours to complete with observations and practice. And very often they're thinking of any which way they can fast track through those hours. For example, they might want to do all of their observations watching Pilates anytime or something, which there's nothing wrong with that. They're good observations to watch these classes, but they're not the only observations. If you want to learn from your observations, you've got to go and observe lots of different people and see what it is they're doing and how successful you feel that is. And that's learning, And the same with the practice hours. It's not a process of just let's get through it. It's like, let's be in there and actually make every hour count.
The observation's a really interesting one, because I had this conversation with someone recently where, depending on where you are on your journey, you're going to observe stuff differently. So if you've just been really getting deep on verbal cueing, you're going to go and observe and really watch how they do that. If you've maybe been looking at how people flow a reformer class on, you're going to be going, oh, how do they get the box on and the box off? And when do they bring it? And how do they move the foot bar? And what did they do when they were changing the springs? And so you're getting, whereas if you did all of those observations in 1 month, you'd miss all of that, because you wouldn't be, that's your point, you wouldn't be mentally in a place where you're learning new things and going, actually, I want to observe now how this is done, which I think is really interesting. The other thing I remember you pulling me up on, and I see it now in people I mentor, is trying to get every cue out that you know, because that's a skill, isn't it, where you start to learn to give your cues some space and also see what's being done and cue with that, and not just try and say it. That kind of goes back to your point of feeling like you need to have learnt it all, and then that's the end point, which it isn't.
And it's this thing of dosage, isn't it? Because I think, especially if we're very keen to impress, we want to get all those great cues out there. Maybe you have done some wonderful observations or had someone great teach you and they've said some amazing things and you really felt a difference. And the temptation is to go back and repeat all of that. But remember, it has to be authentic in what you're saying. It has to mean something to the people you're saying it to. And people can only receive so much information in any moment. So if a particular cue hasn't been given a chance to land and be processed and absorbed by the person receiving it, it's going to kind of be lost if you're just going straight on to the next one and the next one and the next one. You keep overwriting. Whereas, maybe one great cue is enough. If the person or people in front of you are understanding what it is you're asking them to do. And of course, with any teaching, or when we're learning the student, we're going to hear something and it might have some impact. But what happens if you hear that same thing over and over and over again? At what point do you not even hear it anymore? It means nothing. So we want to be able to vary our language and our cueing so people do listen to us, because they have to process, what is it she said? What was that? It meant something.
No, I think that's so true. It's not about sending, pushing the same cues out over and over again. It's also, I think, something I remember we spoke about years ago. There might be a cue that really landed for you one day as a client. You think, I want to use that one. I remember you saying to me, but how many years into this journey were you before that landed? So sometimes it's also to understand clients might not be ready for, could you make your roll up blue? Yeah. Or whatever it might be. You know how abstract we can get. Sometimes I think when you're newer in your journey, you want it to be a bit more simplistic, but sometimes things can change like
that.
And
if those sort of cues come out too soon, everyone just thinks you're bonkers. I'm sure I've been bonkers in the past, so that's fine.
So if you come on a retreat with me, that's where we go. I'm like, I've got you for a weekend, we're going to do it. One of the other challenges I hear from new teachers is they come out of a training, the world of reformer is booming. They're often getting a lot of reformer classes, but it could be any class. And they're getting really overwhelmed with class planning. Now, I know the Polestar methodology is really great and I follow it and it's brilliant. But even within that, I think people spend hours thinking that, they could be teaching 10 classes a week. And the things I hear are they're either spending hours planning, they're making every class different, or they're worried that the client if I teach the same class in the week, if a client comes twice in the week, they're going to be like, you've just done the same class. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I remember having this chat. When you mentored me in my early days, you took so much pressure off me.
Well, this is the thing, because there's so much out there, isn't there? There's so much repertoire. My goodness me, think of all the variations of all the different exercises. And that's not including some of the ones you make up, which, believe me, I make up loads for variety. But the interesting thing, when I work with my regular clients, I'm probably dipping into a much, much smaller pool of exercises. And they're the kind of exercises that will really be relevant for whoever the client is. And in order for them to really get an understanding of these movements and have the experiences that I've talked about, they're going to have to practice those exercises a lot, over and over. In fact, my clients never ever stop doing footwork. I mean, everyone needs footwork on the reformer. And that's not to say I teach it the same way every week with every client, because whatever emphasis you bring, whichever ideas you bring, where are you going to put your focus? You could put the focus more in the feet or more in the pelvis, or it could be about knees, or it could be somewhere up in the head or neck. But wherever that focus is going will be relevant to the person on the day. But the actual classes you're teaching are probably going to be fairly similar in content, but not in the way they're delivered. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think that's what I remember you telling me this, like, keep 80% of it the same, change a few things in or out. The few things you change in or out will change the context of maybe where you're going. And so your footwork, your setup will feel completely different because you're taking them to a different place this time. And so to the client, it's completely different.
Yeah. Intention is everything.
Yeah.
I could teach the same exercise with completely different intentions, and it would seem like different exercises, and different things would be experienced in those exercises. But it's still, we would still call that a mermaid or a quadruped or what have you. So it's the skill to be able to do things like that, where you adapt the exercise to the client.
From your perspective, what do you think clients are looking for when they come for a class?
Well, I have no idea. When somebody comes in my door, I cannot presume anything. So the first thing I have to do is ask them, what's brought you here? And what is it you are looking to achieve? So I need to find that out from them. Now, it might be something that I'm feeling quite in tune with, or it might be something that's really quite outrageous, because people do have some interesting beliefs and wants for themselves. But I still need to know what it is, what's brought them to me, and what is it they think they would like. From there, we can make a start. I learned over the years, I never contradict anyone. So I never say, oh, no, you don't. You don't really want those strong abs, if that's what somebody has told me they would like. But over time, they're going to realise, as we work together, they're going to realise, actually, they probably don't. But they do want a balanced torso and everything working in harmony with everything else, because they feel better, because they move better.
Well, I was going to ask you, how do you balance out maybe what a client wants versus what they need? Because sometimes they can be a bit against each other, but it's that, I guess you always taught me as well, meet someone where they're at, first of all.
Totally. And have a conversation around it. Because sometimes when you actually question people or reflect back, people change their mind about what they actually want. Or they might say, well, I need to strengthen my quads. So I might have a discussion. Well, how do you feel about your quads? What makes you think they're not strong? And then we'll go into that. Maybe it's their knees or something else. And then we might have other conversations around, the body is one big balancing act, actually. So it's never going to be about one muscle. But the good news is, of course, as we do this work, we are going to be addressing the whole of the muscular fascial system. So this is great news for what they want. So I'm quite good at talking things around, but never contradicting.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a skill I'm still working on, that you've worked with me on, is that reflecting back, like hearing what the client says and sort of reflecting it back and asking a question around that in a really collaborative way.
Yeah, it's not confrontational.
No.
Never. Because as soon as you become confrontational, somebody's guard is going to go up. So it has to be, you know, in a curious kind of way. I always bring humour into my teaching. So, you know, with most of my clients, we can laugh about most things. But at the same time, you know, we have a focus. And we want our focuses to align and not be completely different. You know, I wouldn't want to be the kind of teacher that says, well, you know, he wants this, but I'm doing that kind of thing. Or I want to be, you know, authentic with that person and transparent as well.
As well as mentoring students, you have at times, and people have mentioned it in other episodes of the podcast, you've come into studios and you've helped maybe mentor some teachers that work within a studio and help with that. What kind of things are you seeing that studios are asking you to come in and support them with?
It's normally just depth of information. It's because we've talked already about new teachers. And of course, when you're new to this work, you really do have to spend a good deal of time just really working on your craft and getting better and better at it. And you need to bed down for a bit and just develop yourself as a teacher with everything you've already learned. You know, allow that to settle within you. But there comes a time, and this is what often happens at these studios, there's teachers have all been there for some time and they've all been teaching for some time. And maybe just because of their original trainings, or maybe they're just not so inspired by what's going on out there, they're kind of getting a bit stale or running out of ideas. And people say to me, oh, I just find myself saying the same thing over and over, and I want to be inspired. So I often come in and I'd like to think I inspire people, but what I really want to do is just challenge people's ideas on what they're doing and why they're doing it, go into finer detail about some of the movement and what it actually means, and, you know, how it is affecting us. And we can go down the sort of physical route, we can go down the emotional, psychological route with that. And it's one of those kind of ask me anything. I probably, you know, won't know all the answers. Well, I definitely won't know all the answers, but we can start a conversation, and it's the conversations that are so cool, just like we're having now.
Yeah.
So much comes up.
It does.
Doesn't it?
It does. And I think when you've come to our studio, like, it's really interesting hearing from the teachers and the more conversations we have, the more people then feel more comfortable to say what's on their mind and what's challenging them. And as studio owners, not many of us are lucky enough to say, I'm only going to have people who've done my training or a certain training. And even people who've done the same training, like, they can maybe have been taught by a different person. So I think another challenge studio owners have is, if they have this idea that they want to have an ethos, how do they bring all their teachers together with it? Because of course there's lots of schools out there that are training maybe slightly different, some with depth, some with not depth, some people coming out and, you know, saying things like engage your core or engage your glutes, and then other studios who've, you know, like my training with you, it's like, that's not so helpful, but you need depth to understand that. So I remember speaking to you early on and saying, how do I support, you know, as I'm growing this studio and I've got these lots of different people, how do you as a studio owner try and support an ethos that you want to seep through it? Do you have any advice for those people?
Yeah, it is that, it's those questions like you just mentioned, you know, why don't I want to cue this way? Now, you might have understood or heard some story around that when you did your initial training, but at the time it might not have resonated. It might not have been that relevant to you. But a little way down the line, it really is. And there's no point saying to someone, well, don't say that or don't do that, because they need to know why. And our clients are going to ask as well. My clients do all the time, Diane, why don't you say these things? Why are you not asking me to engage my core or breathe in and breathe out every single, motion we do, this kind of thing? And I need to be able to explain to them why, tell the story of the body and how it actually is, rather than how it's perceived by some people in this very reductionist kind of way. So I'm a big storyteller, so I love to tell my stories, and I would like to think that people could understand then, and then once you understand why you're doing something a certain way, you're very happy to go along with it. Otherwise, it just seems like a rule.
And I think that's such a good point. It's not dishing out the rules as a studio owner, but it's bringing the team together and discussing the why.
Yeah.
Because if you understand the why, then you can explain it, like you said, to people as well, can't you?
Absolutely.
What piece of advice would you give to any brand new teachers out there?
Well, I think there probably isn't one piece of advice, because for brand new teachers, it depends on what their goals are. Some people train and they're going to do a little bit of teaching as a part-time add-on thing, and others have trained and they want to be a full-time studio teacher or group class teacher or any of those things. But my advice for anyone, whatever it is, do it wholeheartedly. Love what you do. Because if you don't love what you're doing, you have to question, why am I doing this? Because if you're loving it, then that is going to show. That energy is going to be contagious with those around you. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Be really interested. I don't mind saying I'm a bit of a nerd, because I probably am. But I'm so curious about so many things about the body. It's never stopped revealing itself to me as I've gone on over all these years. And I think for any new teacher, just know there's this wonderful excitement to know there's so much more to come. If you want to seek more. I'm not saying you've got to do this all in the first year. See a long-term plan. And, as you get interested in different things, then go and explore, go and discover, listen to podcasts or watch people talking on the subject, or go and do a workshop here and there and hear what's being said and have an opinion. Really do have an opinion.
I think it's about immersing yourself in this world. I think I was lucky enough to have you as my mentor. I realized very early on, you're never going to know it all. So this idea that, and you're absolutely right, like the schooling system is kind of, once you know it all, you do your exam and then you move on. Actually, this world isn't like that at all. And so you need to have a certification to show you have a certain level of competence.
Yes.
But I always use the analogy of, like, do you remember the first time you drove on your own after you got your driving test? You were like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this on my own. And it's the same. I don't think anyone should feel like when they've got their certification that they suddenly walk into the studio and they're this brilliant teacher.
No.
They're not, and that's okay. And they can know what they know, and they can, all the advice that you've given, I think is going to be really helpful for that. But I think it's understanding that immerse yourself in the world, whether it's, going to classes. That's the other piece I see people do. They forgot why they fell in love with this.
Yeah.
Be client. Because if it's in your body, then you'll be teaching it. Listen to content, go to some of the Pilates workshops. Polestar has great CPD here in the UK, and there's lots of these providers that have that, and be curious and go and do stuff. But feel like this is a never-ending journey. You've been doing this a long time and you still feel like that, which I think is important to recognise.
I do. And I can recognise there were times in my career where I probably didn't move enough and was just relying on my experience as being a teacher. And what's really helped me in the last probably 10 years or so is a real commitment to my own movement practice. And I'm not even just talking Pilates. I would say branch out. Any movement is good. I went down the somatic route and started doing all kinds of different movements Feldenkrais. I love taking a Feldenkrais class or a yoga class or different things which will provoke something inside of me. And that experience is all mine. But it's something I can later rely on when I might be sharing with other people about a similar kind of movement. I can implement, it weaves into my work. And maybe that means I don't teach very pure Pilates anymore, because so many other influences have woven their way in to what I'm saying and teaching. But for me anyway, that's absolutely fine. That's me just developing, rather than just being held or stuck in a moment in time and it forever being that way.
But that's what Joseph Pilates did. He was influenced by all these things. It was my daughter's watching week at gymnastics. So I went in and watched her class, and in the warm-up, I'm kind of going, that's 100, they call it a dish. That's swimming, they called it like a Superman. Like, it was all these moves. I'm like, and he was hugely influenced by gymnastics. So I think it just shows that we should be influenced. And I think you're right. I always remember what one of my students said to me, actually, I've always remembered it. She said, I always think of cueing, of like how I want someone to feel. That's a great way to frame it. And you can only do that if you felt it.
Exactly.
And so going and being a client and being curious about all different kinds of movement, and even within the Pilates space now, it's becoming quite a diverse space. I say to people, go and try that.
Yeah.
Don't poo-poo it. You might really like it. You might enjoy that. You might feel that that's the way you want to teach, and that's fine. But go and experience it. But you also might go, that doesn't land well in my body, and then be curious why.
Yeah.
And then why might I want to do more of a somatic type movement, or, you know, whatever.
Exactly.
And I think all of our movement influences us. And is that your kind of advice to people? Because I think a big piece that I see is that many Pilates training schools don't really implement this idea of always learning. The more courses I go on, the more I realize I don't know very much, and that's very powerful. Polestar instills in you CPD, and they put courses on. I think a lot of trainings don't, and I see a lot of people who've been 10 years comprehensively trained and have never done a training. What kind of CPD resources or continuing education resources do you do? You know, you've talked about going to classes is part of that.
Absolutely.
What else do you like? I mean, I love a podcast or some YouTube content. Like, I think you can be in this world without it. You can go on courses, but you can do it without going on courses as well, can't you?
Yes. I haven't, I mean, I did years ago, by the way. I used to do every kind of bolt on that was going, like, you know, the pre and post-natal and the osteoporosis and all kinds of, you know, different genres of, so I could learn more about these populations.
And that's helpful
which was
too.
very helpful, very, very helpful. So I did all of that and gained knowledge and actually looked even further into these different populations, which I was interested about because they were my client base. But then I started hearing people, and it was mostly at sort of maybe conventions, and not necessarily even Pilates conventions, like the fascia convention, for example, which I fell into. I can't remember how I first came across them with somebody. Anyway, I got into that, and I started listening to these other people talking who were just opening this whole new world to me about movement and the body and the physiology, which was different. And I was just hungry to hear more and, you know, spellbound by it, really, that it's the world of Pilates is actually quite small, and there's so much else out there that we can learn from. And some people will learn these other things, like I did anatomy trains, I did all of the Franklin method. This year I've been studying embryology with Jaap van der Wal, who's just amazing, you know, and anatomist. He's an embryologist, of course. And these people wow you. And you could put your eggs all in that basket and go down all these, you know, rabbit holes. But actually what I've tended to do, and this is a personal journey, I guess, is I take everything that was relevant for me. I mean, I can't take anything that wasn't relevant. I probably didn't even hear that bit. But I take all the bits that were relevant to me and bring it back into the work that I do.
And that's how you get the depth.
That's how you get the depth. It shapes what I do.
Thank you. I think it's been so useful just to have a deep dive on teaching, because you have been such like an amazing resource for me all these years, and I really appreciate you giving me your time today. So thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I'm really grateful that you're here, and I'm loving building this community with you all. Make sure you click the follow button so you don't miss an episode. New ones come out every Monday. And if you found today's content helpful, it would mean a lot if you left a 5-star review, or even better, shared it with someone you think would enjoy it too. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next week.